everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And thank you for continuing on with our series. If you've been paying attention to the last ones, this series is on living freely. And we're exploring what it means to live freely from a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual perspective. And ultimately, how we're able to really land that in this life and actually start to apply some of that and live a life that really does feel more free, especially when it feels sometimes in the world like we're getting constantly restricted in different ways. This is a really timely concept. And today we brought on Suzanne Giesemann. And Suzanne is the author and teacher of The Awakened Way, A Path to Knowing Who You Are and Why You're Here. And this is her beautiful book right there if you're watching this on the video. And she's been included on the Watkins list of 100 most spiritually influential living people. She's a former U.S. Navy commander who served as a commanding officer and aide to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Today, she shares 21st century spirituality, merging the latest scientific understanding about consciousness with ancient spiritual wisdom. Her work provides stunning evidence of the existence of universal consciousness and our interconnectedness. She teaches proven methods that anyone can use to connect with all levels of consciousness. And she is on our chat today to talk about the Awakened Way. So, Suzanne, welcome to our show.
Oh, thank you both. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, we were talking just the other day, Tan and I were just chatting about your book, The Awakened Way, and making the shift to a divinely guided life. And what a different way for people to actually approach how we are living in this world. You know, I feel like these are really the times right now. It's like, I feel like for so long we have tried to figure it out. You know, we've got our to-do list, we mind map everything, and we try to figure out how to navigate our life and avoid the potholes and all of these different things. And I was just saying to Taya yesterday, one of the things I really appreciate personally about being able to like sit and be still is I'm not trying to figure it out. It's like I feel like I get to put my mind to rest and hand it over to something much larger than myself, because I feel like at this point in time, there's just so much that to try to figure it out with my intellect alone, it feels like it creates more stress in my life than being able to kind of hand it over. And I'm wondering from your perspective, is that sort of what you're getting at with making the shift to a divinely guided life? Because it is a very different way of operating in the world than I think what we've been even conditioned to do.
It is a different way, and that is what I'm referring to. It's making a shift from thinking you're only human and you have to figure it all out, just like you were saying, Jason, to realizing we are souls now, not just when we die or before we came here. We are the soul incarnating in a human experience. So when we can make that shift, and the shift is shifting our focus to the soul's perspective, that's freedom. That's peace, not just when you're meditating, but in meditation, you get the experience of who you are as a soul. Then you bring that out into your everyday living and can make that shift moment by moment as needed.
Suzanne, was there a specific time for when you really knew? Because I feel like there's this distinction between what we want to believe, what we're hoping for, and then when you really viscerally have an experience that we're not just this physical body, we're much more than that. And you know it, because I feel like when we cross that barrier, when we cross that sort of that bridge, we actually show up differently. Everything kind of changes. Otherwise, I feel like we're still kind of caught in the same belief systems around stuff and just really hoping that something more is there.
Right. What it took for me was the death of my stepdaughter, and I took my husband to a medium. After seeing her body at the funeral, I knew her spirit had to still exist. And until I was able to connect with her myself, which became my number one goal at the time, we went to a medium. And that rocked my worldview, that experience. There was no doubt from the evidence she brought through that our Susan still exists. And from then, I continued my efforts to connect with her myself and really opened up to the awareness that we are souls now, that all souls exist now, and we can connect with them. So it was the experience through a medium, and then the personal experience of connecting with loved ones across the veil, and with just making that shift in meditation, just and understanding, wait a minute, if I'm able to step back and observe myself objectively, what is this part of me that's doing the observing? That's the soul. So it's been a process, but it is possible for anyone to come to this realization.
How did it change the way you were living when you had that experience? Even if things were, feeling like they were on track and you were living in a certain way and things were working out fine, what landed for you differently? How did it change the way you were being in the world after having that specific experience?
Well, because I was meditating daily, I started to ask questions of higher consciousness, not knowing who is providing the answers, but getting advice and guidance that was not from my conscious mind. And I came to learn that we actually do have guides, helpers across the veil, if you want to use that term. To this day, I haven't seen them, but they have proven their presence to me. And with that military background of mine, I need evidence. And I've gotten knock your socks off evidence that lets me know that we all have these helpers. So how it's changed me is realizing I don't have to do everything alone, and that answers to my questions that are far better than any I could get at this level are available by making that shift, by asking for guidance, by listening, by paying attention, by trusting. So I flow with life now. I am consciously connected, like the subtitle of my book says, meaning I don't just wonder what should I do. I make that shift. I make a conscious connection and say, what should I do? What do you advise me? Then I receive an insight, tune into my heart and test it, act on it, and oh, does life flow? That process is so simple and available for anyone.
Do you have any suggestions for people? Because I know a lot of people would like to be able to connect into that, and a lot of people feel like they don't know how, or they don't have time, or even when they try, it's hard to discern the difference between when they feel like they're genuinely connecting to a higher guidance versus when it's just
when they're thinking their way through it.
right. And sometimes you can, nope, my divine guidance has told me to do this, and it's actually very much in alignment with maybe what the ego wants, and it's kind of been flavored in a little bit of divine guidance. How do you find the discerning between those things? Because it can be tricky, and the narrative that the ego can create can also be really
Enticing.
really enticing and wrapped in ways that we want to hear it. How do you find for you that discernment started to be able to take place?
In my book, I have over 20, probably 25 practical tools and practices to help you do exactly that. My favorite one that answers specifically your question is what I call the sip of the divine, a 3-minute practice that, if done daily, will help people come to know it's not your imagination, and to really weed out what are those ego thoughts versus something that's really helpful to me. And the reason it's so helpful is that in 3 minutes, you can get an answer to a question, but you're also training yourself to focus on one thing so the mind isn't chattering and running off as it does. And you really can't make too many excuses for not having 3 minutes. SIP of the divine stands for sit in peace. And I like to challenge people and say, do you have a special drink you start your day off with? Maybe coffee or tea or a smoothie. How long does it take you to make that and drink it? Probably 5 minutes. So if you can take 5 minutes to sip a special drink, how about 3 minutes a day to sit in peace, access higher consciousness, and come to know yourself as a soul? And it's a specific practice where you ask a question and you listen for an answer that feels helpful and healing. It's not from the ego. And you start to notice how the mind's normal habitual thoughts arise, and you start to say, oh, that's not my answer, and you let it go. And oh, that's just my to-do list, and you let it go. So you're training yourself to step back, to make that shift to the observer, and to notice how the brain works. And so you're much more aware and present in moments when you're not doing the sip of the divine. And amongst all that monkey chatter, you actually hear an answer, and you start to really be able to discern what's your imagination and what's coming from something higher. If that happens, when that happens, you stop and you say, who is this? What more can you tell me? Why did you give me that answer? You engage higher consciousness, and maybe it takes you more than 3 minutes, or maybe not, but you do that every day, 3 minutes. Do that for 3 weeks, and I guarantee you your life will change.
Well, and that's a really doable, very doable exercise for people to incorporate. I kind of feel like if you can't do 3 minutes, then you got to kind of look at why are you not doing 3 minutes? What are you
And
reprioritize?
I can tell you why not, because I have some people I know who said, oh, I'm going to try it, and then they stop. Because when you sit quietly, suddenly stuff, if you read part 1 of the book, stuff stands for sensations, thoughts, and feelings. STF, it's another acronym. Military people love acronyms. Stuff starts to bubble up, and it's stuff often that we have stuffed down. Things we don't want to feel. Fear, guilt, shame, whatever we don't want to feel starts to come up. But as a dear friend showed me, she was in terrible grief after her daughter died. She was so tired of feeling the fear that the grief would overwhelm her that she finally just gave in and said, I'm going to try meditating anyway. And here it came. Here came the grief. She just surrendered to it. And she said it went poof. And that's what happens when we no longer try to stuff down the stuff we're afraid of hearing or feeling and sensing. It flows right through us. When we give it a release, now we're free. There's the peace. And you come to discover the part of you that never changes. So I have someone very near and dear to me who just isn't meditating, said they were going to start, and I know it's because they're just not looking at those things that they're afraid of seeing or feeling. But if you can just stay with it, it can't hurt you. It has a lot to teach you. And then you can actually reach out to these guides and say, why am I feeling this? Or where's all this anger or this fear coming from? And then insights come in for that. And you realize you have this divine counselor right here. If you are brave enough, courageous enough to sit quietly, sit in peace, peace really is the result. Freedom follows that.
I think it's really beautiful because it so reminds me of like the boogeyman in the room. We generally are always trying to stay just one step ahead of this restless energy that we're almost terrified to actually be with. And most of the time we don't even know why, other than it's this uncomfortable sensation that we just don't want this wave to feel like it's going to swamp us. And for people that have listened to our show for a while, this message that Suzanne's bringing is something that's come up in different ways from different people, and if you practice it, it really does change. I remember an old teacher of ours, Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist nun, and she would say, when you can stay with discomfort, whatever that is, and then you'd go through this whole acronym, this fear acronym, feel it in your body, embrace the feeling, allow the thoughts to dissolve. That was kind of the heart of it, the FEA. And then the R was to remember the millions of others going through something similar, that suffering can kind of build compassion or connection, or it can separate. And so, but what she got at was that when you just stay with it and you allow yourself to just feel the physical sensation without stirring it up and making it bigger and getting the storyline to amplify it, it naturally just starts to subside. And she said, not just subside, but it actually transitions into a general place of openness, awareness, and warmth that sort of just, it's like you burn out that, almost that field, and it just opens to something so much grander. And I know personally that's what it feels like when I do sit and stay with whatever it is that's there without giving it much credence.
Well, what you say is why most people feel empty, because they're not embracing their wholeness. By shoving down those emotions and feelings that we don't want to experience, we feel empty and we try to fill it. How many people, even at a red light in their car, will pick up their phone because they don't want even 2 minutes of silence? Immediately turn on the radio or the television at home or in the car, because we can't stand silence. If you're willing to ask, what is it I'm afraid of feeling? And then you actually feel it and ask your guides to help you through it and examine it. Be curious about these things from an observer state. Now you're embracing your wholeness. And this awakened way, my guides told me, it takes you from an emptiness that can't be filled to a fullness that can't be contained. And I just sometimes get to this point where I just want to spew love all over everyone. It just bubbles up. And I was not always like this. It comes from living our purpose, which is not to feel better, but to, I should put it another way. It's not to feel better, but to feel your feelings better. That's it. That makes it more clear. And because all of them, the positive and the not so positive feelings, I don't want to call them bad or negative. They're part of our wholeness. We have positive feelings and not so positive feelings. That's part of life. That's why the soul came here, for the fullness of the experience. And when we shove down anything that's less than positive, we're not fully living.
You know, Suzanne, I was recently, my father had just passed away literally about a week ago, and we were all down there, and you know, the beautiful thing is we all got to be there with him, and right to the last breath at home, and we were with him, and I was reflecting on it, and there's a couple things I'd like to bring up to discuss with you around this, but one of them that I thought was really beautiful is my dad was not a feeling kind of guy. Like, he was sentimental. In his older age, he'd like break down really easy, but he wasn't one to kind of really go into what he was feeling. And, you know, it just wasn't that sort of era, I think. And he would always want like the TV on. Oh, there was always something, right? Like, even when you're not watching, it was just constantly on the background. And what was really interesting was when we were there towards the end, he didn't want any of that. The TV was off. People would say, do you want to put on, you know, the sports game or whatever? It's like, no. Like, he almost naturally got a little more quieter, and also like in his body, he wasn't able to do much. He was pretty much right there. So he couldn't even distract himself by doing much of anything. He really was put in a position to just be there. And even towards the end, I remember like almost the last flailings, it felt like, of the discomfort in the physical body, just even trying to find a comfortable position, until there was eventually just, it felt like a total surrender, and he just laid back. And Suzanne, I mean, he was looking out at something he was seeing, and he didn't blink for about 20 minutes. We just sat there with him, and it just slowly transitioned off. I mean, it was really moving and really beautiful, but it made me just feel like, if we're practicing being in stillness throughout our life, we give ourselves such a gift for that when we do come towards the end of maybe this physical existence, that we can be there and be really present for it. Because I saw it almost force my dad to have to get into that sort of state as he was transitioning towards the end.
Well, the soul prepares us for passing. We may not always know it, but I have a wonderful video that's helped a lot of people called "Does the Soul Suffer When the Body Dies?" And I had a beautiful being who is still living, but on his final breaths, come through in a reading that I did for somebody to show me I may look like my body's suffering. It's making all kinds of noises, and you know, the death rattle and all that, but he said my soul is perfectly fine. It's still joking.
That's beautiful. I liked one of the parts in your book, towards the beginning. I think it was actually in the introduction, and you talked about the human BS.
Oh.
And one thing I really liked about that was because also this experience for me was just so recent with my dad. And you can't help but then have conversations with everybody around spirit, soul, what happens after, what belief systems we have around life, death, and beyond, all of these sort of pieces. And one thing that when I was reading this that became really evident was, I think that sometimes people have a belief, and this might tie with sort of like the feeling of the hope that there's something else that's maybe after the physical body. But then I went through, you have a section there where you talk about the symptoms of when you really do believe that you are only this physical body or this human existence. And I thought that was really important for people to read, because sometimes even if we are thinking that there's more, if we look at what our actions are, we're not necessarily connected to that actual full belief that we really do believe there's a soul and there's something else. I'm wondering if you can go through some of those symptoms a little bit, and I can go through some of them too with you from your book. But the ones that jumped out with me, and you mentioned earlier, was this inability to be still, like that we have to constantly put something out and have noise. And I just noticed, like, how often do people just automatically turn the radio on or automatically turn the TV on? And what happens when we don't have any of those things? Is that restlessness catching up?
I was going to look at the book and look, but I don't need to, because I've lived every one of them. We
Yeah.
all do. Those are very human behaviors, such as sedating those less than positive feelings that come up with sugar, alcohol. I haven't done the drugs part, but the addictive type behaviors, shopping, whatever it is, putting ourselves down, just not treating ourselves like we would treat our best friend. And again, filling the silence, having to do instead of just being content, just being. What else jumped out at you?
Those ones particularly around it just reminds me of that restlessness, like just needing to kind of keep busy, because I feel like it's also in the world today, it's just so much easier, than say my dad's era when he was growing up or something. You'd occupy yourself with different things, but now it's just so easy to be digitally distracted and let that sort of constantly satisfy that sort of itch to do something. And I was just thinking, like, that would be a really good practice for people to just pay attention to what we do almost automatically. And if we stop doing it, what comes up in the body, what actually surfaces that gives us an opportunity to maybe ask some more questions around, or to stay with sensation for a little while.
Right. And another, on a different level, another one of these very human behaviors is judging each other, not just ourselves. That's built into us, to compare, to judge. However, the soul doesn't judge at all. I had a dream that dug up some things in me this morning, and I get daily messages from my guides. I've been putting them out for years. I have a free app called the Awakened Way app. And so this morning's message is about self-forgiveness. And the guide started it out with, if you're feeling shame about something, ask yourself, would you do the same thing now? Something you did in the past. We judge ourselves constantly for things we've done, and then we project that out on judging others. That just causes us to feel separate. And we are separate as humans at the human level. It's very obvious, here's where I end and there's where you begin. But when you sit in meditation and come to know yourself as the soul, you realize the soul is a being of light, and light just flows and interacts, and that turns us all into one interconnected web of, like Thich Nhat Hanh said, interbeing. I love that. And so when you make that shift to the soul's perspective, you don't judge them. You see them as souls incarnating for the human experience and seeing through a unique lens. We all have our own unique lenses.
Do you find, Suzanne, that when people just start doing these practices, when they just start actually doing the SIP exercise, when they start to do meditation, when they just start to be still and practice even being with discomfort and these different sensations that arise in the body, just in doing that, do you find that then naturally what happens is, rather than them trying to figure out, I shouldn't judge, I got to stop judging, but it just organically doesn't show up the same way? They just find that they've got a different perspective on how they're viewing, like they saw one thing this way for a long period of time, and now all of a sudden it just feels different in their body.
It's both, and it doesn't become this black and white. I used to be that way, I'm this way. You realize that life is gray in many cases. We're still going to have our human behaviors, but you catch yourself more quickly and you make the shift more often. and you react differently. The book is not just meditative practices. There's some really fun, very practical tools, such as just being aware of what I call the human spirit dial. If you think of a fuel gauge, here's the arrow and it goes, to empty and to full. Well, I say, well, on this side, we have the human aspect of us. Over here, we have the soul aspect, and our dial is constantly going back and forth between where our focus is. So the more you do the practices in the book, the more balanced you are, able to hold that I am both human and a soul at the same time perspective. And there are times when we become very saintly. And then there are times when we're not so saintly and we do very human things. So the goal is to find that balance, and it becomes kind of fun. Like I tell a story in the book of how I was driving our big bus with a car behind us down through San Francisco traffic, 10 lanes of traffic, really stressful. And this guy cut me off, and I tell people, I put myself on report, I made a gesture at the driver. And my husband in that moment in the passenger seat, who knows me now as this spiritual teacher, he married a Navy officer. Now he's married to this spiritual teacher. He looked at me and he said, yes, she's human, And I looked at him and I said, H100. The human side was 100% dialed up. And then I realized, okay, maybe that driver was an idiot, or maybe he's on the way to the hospital. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. I'm just going to go back to neutral. And that's the way we play with this, being consciously connected moment by moment, not just being saintly all the time, but flowing and realizing we have a choice all the time. And that determines our peace.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good message for people to hear too, because I feel like also in the spiritual circles, a lot of people can create tons of judgment on themselves because it feels like they haven't arrived at where they're supposed to arrive to. And that almost they're not supposed to have these different human emotions with different situations. And the reality is, I mean, to me, I think when you said, you feel your feelings more intensely,
Yes.
whatever is coming up. And right now, I think also there, when you go through, when you see things in the world that take place that are hurtful or that seem like they are abusive or whatever, I understand the perspective of like seeing all the different layers of it, but I think there's probably a human level that comes in on that you need to still honor in some regard and feel, and then allow it to transition into different pieces. What's your perspective on that?
My perspective on that is to honor our humanity and our soul nature. And so when we read headlines and we see somebody that's done something terribly cruel, we feel that and we feel our empathy. But some people can get so sucked up into the drama that then it becomes polarized. They can't see the other perspective. They can't understand why that person did that. And you will never find a solution when it's polarized. So you feel that, but then you make the shift to the soul's perspective, which has detached compassion, meaning not judging, observing, yet the compassion is still there. And from that higher perspective, then we can come to solutions. And then you're not getting pushback from the other side. So anytime you can bring love into the equation, it really does a beautiful job of dissolving conflict, because it's like if you jump into a pool, you have to hit the bottom to be able to bounce back up with power. But bringing love into the equation is like taking the bottom out. There's nothing for anybody to push back against. There's just this floating. And so it's really helpful to know that it's okay to be human, but let's also bring in the human perspective, or the soul perspective, sorry.
Yeah. So what does that look like for people practically in the world? Like, for example, I know different people that might be in a big struggle right now where either they're in relationships that are just borderline abusive or are not comfortable, and they've kind of hit a point where they know something needs to change. And then there's this what I find sometimes gets in there, it's like, okay, well, I understand why they're doing that. what's happened, why they're acting the way they do, and I have compassion for that. And then sometimes that almost gives way to then allowing certain behavior versus how do you help people with that regard? Because I feel like sometimes it gets confusing for people as far as what do they allow in, where does it come back to them as far as how they need to still show up, and boundaries and all of these different pieces.
It comes with the understanding that the same being, source, is in all beings and came for that particular experience within that body. So you, listening, came here for your experience to learn how to grow in love. And that does not mean taking abuse, but it also doesn't mean we came to change others. You came to be the expression of love. So if you're in an abusive relationship, you can send love to that soul, but you ask yourself always, what is the best way to honor the soul within me right now? So treat everyone with love and respect, but mostly yourself. And I have just made that a goal of mine. I very rarely get nasty emails, which is surprising considering that I do some work talking to spirits and working as a medium that some people would find frightening. And so you can see you might get some snarky emails, but I get so few. But when I do, instead of just hitting delete, instead of writing back with defensiveness, I go to a place of love and I ask, why is this person acting like this? Then I tell them that I hear them and I honor what they're saying and I send them love as I write it. I don't defend anything. And I've only had to do this 4 or 5 times. Every time they've come back and said, oh my gosh, I was really nasty in that email. Thank you for hearing me. It's stunning. So if somebody were truly abusive and hurling insults, I would hit delete. That's a level that it's not my place to try to change. But hopefully I answered your question already, that it's all about honoring your personal experience and growing and being the presence of love. And that's very hard for parents, of course, who feel it's their responsibility to change their children. Well, it's their responsibility to model and provide love for the children so the children can make wise choices themselves, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, children is definitely a hard one for parents because everything you think you're doing is to try to support them and hopefully prepare them for life and to have a more beautiful life, hopefully. But in that process, it can be they can have a very different idea than you do as far as what you think is beneficial for them and ultimately what their path is and what they need to learn.
So it's very helpful to see all of your interactions with people at the soul level. And my staff and I joke a lot about going onto the balcony in the theater as souls and watching us play our roles on the stage and looking at each other as the souls and saying, oh my God, they're going to do that again. Oh, look, she's about to say that again. Oh, no, don't do it. Oh, she did it again. And then we say, pass the popcorn. So that's our phrase, pass the popcorn when things just get a little rough between people that we're trying to help, because when you can take that perspective and step back and see us all as actors on a stage, it really changes things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it comes down sometimes to our ability to work with change. And I feel like that if there's one thing that is inevitable is that things are going to continue to change. But if there's one thing that probably everybody struggles with more than anything is change and clinging on to anything that gives them a semblance of certainty, whether that's beneficial in their life or not. What have you found as far as ways that people can navigate life and change more effectively? What are ways that we can start to work with that? Because I also feel like, and I feel like where we are kind of currently, I think we're probably going to see lots of change in our world, more than we probably have in different aspects of the past or different areas where we kind of go through cycles of major change that takes place. But, it's almost like if we're going to see more and more change, we're going to have to figure out how to navigate it with a little bit more grace.
Well, that's very simple. Just get a Post-it note, write in great big letters, flow, and stick it on the mirror where you brush your teeth. so that you remind yourself, maybe tattoo it on the back of your hand, to flow. And as you have a trigger word like that, in a good way, a good trigger, you have a process or a visualization such as, okay, if I'm flowing, perhaps I'm on a raft in a river and I'm literally floating instead of trying to go against the current, which is what we do when life flows. Life is a process. Everything is flowing, and our brains are programmed for stability. Again, the soul took on these bodies knowing it would have certain challenges that are built in, like a game, like, okay, how can we make this tricky? So they really have to navigate. And once this human side learns to just flow and tune in and say, wow, look, this is changing. How do I best handle this? You learn to flow with the guidance. It becomes a way of being to moment by moment attune to what's really happening and what will make it easier to navigate. I cut a finger over the summer really badly, and the band-aids wouldn't stay on, and it just wasn't healing. And I had to be super careful everything I did so I wouldn't bang it and cut it open again. And that became this beautiful tool for presence for me. And I realized if we could be present moment by moment to make sure we're not making a misstep, then we would flow. Then we would notice and learn that change is the way of life, and that we actually can have fun with that instead of clinging. So find yourself little tools or practices, visualizations like that. Imagine you have a hurt finger. When I was in the Navy, our summer uniform was all white. Not the working day-to-day uniform, but the dressy one. White skirt, white jacket, white shirt. Can you imagine every time you walk around, you had to be careful not to rub up against anything. It was just awful every day. Even your shoes were white. Couldn't scuff the shoes. You had to be super present. Well, if we were super present, aware that we have this higher aspect that is already intertwined with all that is, has access to every answer you need in every moment, we would walk around with our radar on, saying, am I getting guidance? I have a tool in the book called Watching for Snags. When you are aware, those in the spirit world, your guides, your loved ones who have passed, will catch your attention with something in your immediate surroundings, like a snag. And you say, why did I just focus on that billboard? Why did I just focus on that license plate? Why did I just see that rose that's been there in the vase all week? And you ask the question, but not wondering, you're asking higher consciousness, why did you snag me with that? And here comes guidance. It becomes fun. Life is no longer a struggle. You are flowing, and you're noticing that life is changing, but it's changing in wondrous ways because you're consciously connected. It's a whole different way of living, and not the way I lived the first half of my life. And I can tell you now, it's transformational.
We've talked lots in the past with different guests around synchronicities and sort of when you are starting to live more of this divinely guided life, those are popping in. I think they're probably there most of the time, but you've kind of dialed in to be aware of them and to see them, and they definitely help, because I find for me they help the most usually when things are more challenging, or you seem like you're kind of like, what the hell's going on? Am I on path? Have I misstepped? What's going on? And then all of a sudden you look and there's a synchronicity that pops in and it's like, oh, okay, thank God, because someone thinks, someone knows what's going on, even if I don't know what's going on here. You feel like you're being held a little bit.
Right. And you start to notice when you're hitting a wall and you say, that's a sign in itself that I'm not flowing. And then you stop and you ask, so how could I be doing things better? Why am I hitting a wall? And you listen, you pay attention. If you don't get an immediate answer, just continue flowing and it will become clear.
Suzanne, does everything just get easier in that regard when you are more divinely guided? Or do you, because I think sometimes people think like, okay, and this is what a lot of even the marketing around some of this where it can be like, okay, if you do this, you can meet the love of your life. If you do this, you'll have financial success. Like all of these different pieces. Sometimes and this has just been my personal experience, is that it doesn't always happen like that. Sometimes I find like stuff happens that can shake up what was going on, and it almost need to shake up to put me in a whole different direction or in another path or something.
Let me tell
So
you, life
yeah.
doesn't get easier. Human life is challenging, but the way we flow with it makes it appear easier for us on an individual level. There is no doubt. I mean, I have such flow in my life. Do I have bumps? Absolutely. Do I have challenging times? Absolutely. But then I have this toolkit and I pull out a tool and we're back in balance again. It's truly phenomenal. I want to just make sure I make one point that about human life that I don't want to miss. I interviewed someone the other day, and this person, a spiritual teacher, said that they no longer feel grief now that they know who they are. I didn't want to call them out on air, but I completely disagree with that. That's part of our humanity, to grieve a loved one who passed. We are here for the fullness of experience. I cannot imagine if someone very close to me passes, not grieving them because I'm spiritual. That's not the goal. I will grieve, but I will have tools to find balance in between the troughs of the grief. And so I just really wanted to make that point, that this doesn't mean life is always pleasant. We talked about the fullness and the wholeness, and that's what brings out our true nature of this underlying joy that's always there, even in the depths of grief.
Mhm. And I feel like even from my own experience, I feel like I feel those even more intensely, but I maybe don't get wrapped up in the story as much around it and sort of, ruminate on it or lament on it and turn it into more. But, when grief hits, it's like it can be a really large amount of grief that comes up, and
Yeah,
but it feels like it moves through,
it
right?
does.
And it's not
That's
sort of then turning into these other things that, because I haven't allowed the process of it, that then it becomes intertwined in my life in other ways that I'm not even really conscious of.
Yeah, everything flows through. I was given a lesson in the middle of the night when my guides, I know they orchestrated this. I woke up with this, it was not a dream, it was more like a meditation, but very real images of these gargoyle-like beings coming at me, attacking me. One of them with their hands around my throat. It was terrifying. And just because of the practice, I just looked at them and said, I don't know who you are, but I love you. I send you nothing but love. And it stayed for a couple more seconds. I said, I know you can't kill me. I know I can't die. I'm sending you only love. And they just dissolved. It was like this beautiful lesson. And once you really get it, that at the soul level, nothing can hurt us. I know this physical body will die. I wouldn't step out in front of a car. I wouldn't provoke someone's anger, but it's only our thoughts that will hurt us. We send them love instead of judging even our own thoughts. They flow, just like you said, Jason.
Suzanne, is there something unique around our current times? Anything that you've kind of connected in with, or as far as in alignment with just bigger changes taking place? I mean, we've had many conversations, like I said, with indigenous elders and shamans and you name it. We've talked to lots of different people, and from their perspective, we are going through a very unique time right at the moment. I'm wondering if you've got any insight around that as well, and also what people can do to navigate these times more consciously.
What's unique about these times is just that more people are coming to know who we really are. More people are awakening. More people are meditating, doing body practices like yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong, and being more present and aware, feeling our interconnectedness with others. I can tell people I'm a medium and they don't go running away out of fear. It's a beautiful thing that we're all becoming more willing to discuss metaphysical things, meaning beyond the physical. And the more we come to know we're not only human, we're part of one big web connecting all that is, and that love is the creative healing force of the universe, the more peace we'll have in our world. What those three things I just shared with you, those are the three principles of the awakened way. And you're seeing people live that way. We have a long way to go, but that's what's unique about this time. So the way to continue that is with what I call the 3 E's of the awakened way. Number 1, educate yourself about who you really are. And that comes through reading books, watching podcasts like this, learning more, going down all those beautiful rabbit holes of the metaphysical path. That's E, educate. The second one is experience who you really are as a soul for yourself. And you do that through the sip of the divine or other meditative practices. I have a 7-step process for connecting with higher consciousness that's helped thousands of people go really deep and connect with their own loved ones. So experiencing the soul for yourself makes a huge difference. Not rather than just reading about it or hearing about it, you get it because you've had the experience. And then the third E is engage higher consciousness for yourself. Have a conversation with a guide, even if at first you don't hear anything back. Engage with angels, even if you don't believe in them. Ask for their help, ask for signs that they're really here, and be open and willing to play with them. Engage by saying, who just tickled my hair? Who is this that I feel around me? So the engagement part leads to the experience. It's not necessarily linear, just constantly educating, experiencing, engaging, and watch how life flows then.
From your experience with mediumship, when someone passes, is their spirit always accessible, or do they move on to a place where they're just not here anymore or accessible? They're somewhere else. How does that work? Or is there even like a time limit? Is it different for each spirit? What sort of happens when someone passes?
No time limit that I've found at all. I've connected with people who passed 50 years ago and even longer. I do give people a little time to adjust once they pass, so they get to learn how to communicate without a voice box. But I have learned through experience that all are accessible. Some may not show up simply because it could be not a good resonance with the medium. But some people say, what if they've gone to the light? We are the light. We're in the light now. It's just, are they paying attention and ready to communicate here and now? You can be having multiple experiences at once, as my dear friend Brenda Baker, who's now across the veil, showed me within days of passing, came back with amazing evidence that I share in the beginning of the book, irrefutable evidence that I was talking to her within hours after she passed. And then a couple of days later, coming back and saying, I'm in multiple places at once, and multiple friends feeling her presence at once. So it's very different reality than here. And we limit ourselves if we think you can only communicate with someone for a short period of time and they have to be in this reality. No, consciousness is that flow that we talked about.
Suzanne, are you able to have these conversations with your former colleagues? Are they open to such a world?
Yes, I don't maintain too much contact with those in the military, but I have a female colonel that was on the joint staff with me, and I've done a reading for her, and we have great conversations. One of the former senior enlisted aide to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is in the documentary Messages of Hope that's on YouTube and Amazon Prime, and we recreated the scene where I came out to him and said, I talked to people who have passed. And it's really funny because we were in a restaurant and we were chatting, and I told him this, and he reached over and he turned off his cell phone. He said, I want to hear more, because if it were anybody but you, I'd be asking for the check right now. He said, but I know you, and I know your integrity and your honesty, and I know that you wouldn't be saying this if it wasn't your experience. It's a few other people, but let me put it this way. Everybody who I used to be with in the military, who I've stayed in contact with, knows about it. And I don't hesitate at all to share it.
Suzanne, have you had any yourself going through this process and this path of being able to connect to higher consciousness? Any specific roadblocks or pitfalls that you ran into that you had to kind of navigate through to be able to move forward and be able to connect more wholly to higher states of consciousness that might help people?
Oh, definitely. For anybody who wants to connect across the veil with others, our biggest stumbling block is our own lack of trust that the spirit world is real, that they're here, they're willing to talk to us. The human ego thoughts pop up constantly to say, oh, I'm making this up. Or I got a message, I can't possibly share that with someone else. What if I'm wrong? What will they think of me? See, that's all the human stuff where the soul just has all this information that wants to be shared, and we get in our own way. So belief is the number one key for connecting with higher consciousness. Belief that there is a non-physical realm populated with sentient, creative, intelligent, humorous beings who want to communicate with you. Then the intention on your own part to connect with them, and then sending out loving energy and intention to connect. Those are the real keys right there to doing it. And then getting the ego out of the way. My Bless Me method, Bless Me is another acronym, 7 steps for connecting, really counters that human process through several of those steps to get yourself out of the way and shift to the right state of consciousness, not necessarily the right one, an appropriate, productive state of consciousness for connecting with other beings.
It's one thing I like about your book too, is you've got lots of, I mean, people need practical, if they don't really know where to start or they haven't done it, you've got some really simple and fairly short, like things that people can just start to apply and try out themselves and then see what their experience tells them. So I think there's some really helpful pieces in that. And Suzanne, kind of in closing, any final messages that you have for the audience in regards to this whole concept of being able to live more freely and what it means to actually live freely from your perspective and maybe how that's changed over your
Yeah,
years?
I'm laughing because you asked that just as I picked up my mug. This is one that I had made, it has the Awaken Way logo on the front. And this phrase, "you are so very loved," is the way my guides end every one of the daily messages. And that is the most practical tool right off the bat, is to come to allow yourself to know you are so very loved. Every one of us matters and is beloved by those in the spirit world and by your own soul. And anything that's blocking you from feeling that and experiencing that is simply your human side. So get in the habit of saying, you're okay, parenting yourself. And the more you do that, you're going to start radiating that to the world and truly attracting that to yourself. It's a feedback loop, because that's life. Life is another acronym, Jason and Taya. It stands for love in full expression. And we came here for the experience of being that.
Beautiful. Suzanne, where can people learn more about the work you're doing, where they can get your book? I know you've got different workshops and whatnot. Where can people learn more about what you're doing and what's on the go?
Just type my name in any search box, SuzanneGiesemann.com. My website is huge and full of gifts. I have a lot of free material, and I have quite a few online courses that have helped people tremendously. They say they feel the energy in them, a higher energy, which makes me very grateful that we're helping a lot of people. But books, workshops, binaural beats, meditations, and again, check out the gifts page, the resources page, and the Awaken Way app. My YouTube channel, over 400 videos, and a weekly podcast of my own. So lots of ways to stay connected. I do monthly webinars with the latest teaching from the spirit world. I've been doing these for 7 years now. We call it the Monthly Connection, and have an actual community of kindred spirits where people who say, I don't feel like there's anybody I can share this with, truly feel a part of a community, which is beautiful.
Wonderful. What's the name of your podcast again?
Messages of Hope.
Okay. And what kind of people do you interview for messages of hope, and what's the sort of theme around that for people?
The theme is mostly people who have made a connection with beings across the veil. So we have regular people a lot of times who have somebody who passed and they've made a connection with them, but also experts. For example, coming up soon is Dr. Jill Pulte Taylor talking about the brain as a filter of consciousness and how we can understand the way the brain acts in whole brain living to experience our wholeness, just like I was talking about in the program earlier. So anything that's going to get people to living the awakened way.
That's really fun. You'll have fun chatting with her. We talked to Jill about it a year ago,
She's
and
adorable.
she's wonderful. And she also helps, even what we were talking about earlier, with the feeling all of the feelings and actually staying with it. She kind of helps to explain from a biochemical point of view that when you do that, you literally break up that neurochemistry that literally sits in the body and dissolves. So other than the feeling, you're seeing it from a biochemical standpoint as far as what's going on too. So wonderful.
I did pre-record that one, and what I enjoyed about that was putting her to the test and saying, "You're talking about being an energy ball, but I know you're really talking about the soul." And she said, "Yes, that's my scientific term." And when we get down to it, people may say, "Oh, that's woo-woo," but no, it's just different words for the
Yeah.
same thing. Spirit, soul, energy. You have scientific terms, religious terms, spiritual terms. Basically, we are beings of light all the time. You already know it at the deeper level. Let it shine through and your life will flow.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. It's all the same languages that we've seen too, just over the years and interviewing very different, diverse people. And usually you'll see the overlap of where they're all saying the same thing in their own unique way. And at a certain point, just kind of realize like it's all the same stuff. It's just whatever way you're being drawn to understand it or know it or explain it for people that are, like Jill and other people like yourself and whatnot that have this gift to share with everyone. So, Suzanne, we will make sure that we've got all of all of your information and links in the show notes so we can go check out all of that information. And that was wonderful. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your time and for being a part of this series.
Totally joyful. I love your energy and grateful for helping people learn more about who we really are.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.